guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new or simply not yet subscribed, I'm Brittany, and definitely make sure to hit that subscribe button. Ouija boards are something that I always think has a misconception about them. People often just deem them just straight up as bad. But if they're used the right way, then they're just not inherently bad. I think if you are using them with no idea about who you're talking to or what you want to talk to, then that can be bad. I think that if you're using them and you're leaving them open, obviously that's bad. But at the end of the day, it's just a tool to communicate. So it's not inherently bad, but some people have really bad experiences with them that scares them. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So this is a true encounter. And here we go. It says, my first experience with a Ouija board was at a friend of a friend's house. I was there with my best friend and her boyfriend at the time. My best friend, we'll call her Jessa, had grown up in this house that was notoriously haunted. The women who lived there would wake up with scratches on their backs. They would routinely see the ghost of a little boy, crazy stuff all the time. Anyway, Jessa's childhood friend moved in there when the family moved out, and we were there for her housewarming party. Jessa's friend had a board. Jess and I are both pretty spiritual. Neither of us wanted to touch it. Nothing was happening, so Chuck convinced us to do it, saying we were witchy. As soon as we touched it, the cursor started moving. At first it was saying it was a little boy. Jess and I looked at each other like, oh no. Both of us knowing about the little boy in the house. Suddenly Chuck was like, oh man, did you guys feel that? We all felt it. The air became thick, like hard to breathe. He described exactly what I felt. It was almost like the air was thick fog or mist, but it was still dry. The board started spelling things like F her, cheater, the B word, F you, he F'd her. The cursor was moving more rapidly with every word. Finally, Jessa was like, okay, stop. And the pointer stopped, dead in its tracks. It stopped too abruptly that my hands slipped off. When I touched it again, it slowly dragged to the bottom of the board, ending on goodbye. Months later, I was crashing at a friend's place, Kay and Jay. They had a basement apartment, and I was crashing on their couch. The guys invited over some girls I didn't know, and they wanted to try using a Ouija board. I didn't want to touch it, but it wasn't working, so I finally gave in and decided to try it. As soon as I touched it, the pointer started to move. I was touching the pointer with my friend Kay. The cursor was moving really slowly. As a game, I said, move faster, and it started moving quickly. I kept saying faster, and eventually it was moving so fast. My friend touching the cursor was saying, this isn't funny, as if I was moving it. I said I wasn't moving it, and he freaked out. Releasing the board, the pointer went shooting across the room. At that point, we were all pretty convinced it was real. One of the girls wanted to see more, so we grabbed the cursor and started again. So then the board asked to speak to a girl named Haley. The board said, family, father, and proceeds to spell her dad's name. She starts freaking out. The board says it's sorry about her dad, that her dad is a drug addict and her mom was a drunk. It says that she has to leave her house because her dad is angry. Haley started crying and freaking out, and then the board said goodbye. We get back to the apartment and Haley's crying. She tells us that her dad was a dealer and her mom is drunk all of the time. Her home life is awful. Her dad would frequently get drunk and drugged up and hit her. She was only 16 or 17 at the time. Kay and Jay say she can stay at their place too. Interestingly, months later, Haley's mom dropped her off at the apartment, and she told Haley that her great-grandfather helped build the place. She said he lived there his whole life and died there. After that night, I started reading about Ouija boards. A couple nights later, I went to visit my best friend and her boyfriend at his place, which was a walking distance from my apartment. I told them about the whole thing. He says he wants to try too. Reluctantly, Jessa and I agree. Keeping in mind, we had been drinking. The cursor starts spelling out trees, broken glass. Suddenly, it starts getting violent, spelling out like things of assaulting nature. Jess and I tell it to stop and we say goodbye. The cursor drags to goodbye and we put the board away. Suddenly, Chuck is like, oh no, dude, you're not walking home. He then explains his interpretation of what the board is saying. On my walk to my friend's place, like I said, they lived in a basement apartment. So instead of walking through the halls, we just go to the living room window and climb in. To get to the window, I would cut through a back clearing where there was tall trees all over. He's convinced that there are bad guys in there on that night and that if I walked home, that I would be SA'd. Needless to say, after that visual, I stayed over. The next morning when I walked through the clearing, there was broken glass bottles all over the place. And my friend said that they heard people drinking out there all night. Anyway, I moved out and Haley and I became friends. Kay brought the board over as a housewarming gift. One day, my cousin came over to my apartment with her boyfriend at the time. He notices the board in the corner. He asked me about it and I laugh and I tell him the whole story. His eyes get all wide and he asks if we can play it. I agreed and we started asking it questions. The pointer started spelling out Jess's name. We all get in the car and head over to her place. She's not home, but Chuck is. I left the board in the car with my cousin and her boyfriend and go to talk to Chuck. He said Jessa was at work until 9, but we could come in and wait for her. After the last incident, he was interested to see what was going to happen. When I got to the car, my cousin and her boyfriend said they heard fingers tapping, as if something was waiting impatiently for me to get back. So we sat around waiting for a while and Chuck brings out his own board from the last time it was over. We use it and it says, Jessa, Jessa, and pointing to the no, then to the sun in the corner of the board. Over and over, no sun, no sun. Eventually I figured out what it was saying, no light. I asked if it wanted me to shut off the light and I said, no, we're not going to do that. I had read that bad spirits do not like the light. Finally, when Jessa got home, she said she was too tired and didn't want to try using it. We agreed to leave it alone and brought the board home. I didn't like having it in my house. So the next time I went to visit Haley at Kay and Jay's place, I brought it back. She said she wanted to try it one more time and then we would get rid of it. I agreed. At this point, I was clearly addicted to it for some reason. So Haley and I are at the basement apartment, climbing out of the window near the back clearing with the trees. We go back in and use the board. The board started spelling out Haley's name, and this time the spirit says its name is Maria. Haley immediately starts to cry and says that's not funny. But the board keeps saying, tell them I miss them. Tell them I love them. I'm here. I love them. As Haley is crying, she explains that her best friend's mom, Maria, had died a year ago. I remembered the death. It was big news in our high school. Suddenly, the cursor moved and spelled my name. I asked who it was, and the cursor spelled out Deb. I read that bad spirits cannot tell their names because they don't have one. Not true. If a spirit can spell a name, then it's usually a good one. Again, not true. I ask how I know her, and she says she's my spirit guide. Haley says, how do we know you're real? And the cursor spells out cigarette. And I said, what do you mean? And it says window. We look at each other and our hearts sink. I'm like, she knows that we smoke outside? I said, how will we know? And she said, trees. I'm like, nope. And Haley says, we have to do it. So we're outside smoking and I'm looking into the forest, sweating in fear, thinking I'm going to see this demon face in the branches or something. Eventually we relax, but then Haley mid-sentence, her face drops and goes white and she's like, get inside now. I'm like, what happened? She says that behind me in the distance, there was a big, like 100-foot tall tree. There was no wind. I remember this because I was watching my smoke go directly up and I was blowing perfect O's without them disappearing. She says the tree was still, then suddenly the whole tree, including the trunk, moved back and forth and then went back to being perfectly still. I was like, nope. And after a while of freaking out, sat back at the board. When we put our fingers on it, it said, did you see? We freaked out. It was spelling, it's okay, I love you, it's okay, don't be scared. Finally, it asked to speak to only me and for Haley to go away. Haley jokingly said, aw, you don't like me? And the board said, don't be sad. This story closes pretty weak because in my mind, nothing really came of it. When I tried to use the board on my own, nothing happened. I couldn't move it without the help of Haley and my spirit guide. Couldn't communicate with me. I like to think it was real and my spirit guide Deb was just trying to get me off the board. As I said, we had talked about it a lot and we were using it quite a bit. I sometimes wonder what Deb wanted to tell me. It was almost like there was something that was trying to warn them. And like the one time, it does sound like if she were to go outside and went home, that something really bad could have happened to her. Especially since they found the broken bottles and it sounded like people were partying there and stuff. And she would have been walking through right at that time. But it's not true that spirits, like dark spirits, don't have names. Like there's plenty of demons that have names. And dark spirits can also be human spirits, like human souls that were dark in life, which therefore they would have had a name. So again, I think that if you're educated and you have a clear intention when you're using a Ouija board, it's not bad. At the end of the day, it's just a tool, but you have to be smart about it. Make sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button, and if you have any paranormal encounters that you would like to tell me, I would love to hear them. You go ahead and email me at brittanybrierghost@gmail.com, and until my next video, I love you guys. Bye!